Waiting for the indicator. And we're live.
Hooray. I love that moment when we are on
I know.
line and we're live and everything.
We go from two
peachy.
connections to many connections. It's fun. We're doing another Friday session.
Yep.
So
Summer Friday.
Happy almost weekend.
That's right. And also for those celebrating, happy almost 4th of July.
Yes, for those of us in the U.S. and expats abroad.
Exactly. So that's pretty exciting. And if you haven't seen the amazing play Hamilton, and if you have Disney Plus or you know someone who has it, you can watch it because they're going to be showing it, which is really
the Hamilton
musical
Broadway performance, which swept the world by storm.
Yeah, it was
certainly
amazing.
the U.S. and Europe by storm several years ago. Tickets were going for like thousands of dollars to go.
Yeah.
Well, now it's available on Disney Plus for all of $9.99.
Exactly.
We should be advertising for them.
I
We have
know.
no affiliation.
No affiliation.
We're just excited. We love the play.
And we love Hamilton.
Yeah. So,
on that note,
what's our topic today?
Today we're talking about how to discuss the employment gap. Anytime there's a gap in your resume, a little blip in your work history, how do you explain to the hiring manager, the person interviewing you, what you did during that time, right?
Yeah, it's always a tricky question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. And we're going to talk about a couple strategies that you can use, some ways of confidently expressing what you did at that time, explaining, the activities and things that you were up to at that moment, right?
Cool. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I've definitely been in these interview situations. They ask a question like that, and you just sort of freeze because, you obviously in an interview, you want to put on your best self and to give the impression that you're always, in full momentum, full stride. And sometimes these questions can totally throw you off your track.
Off guard.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And so, as with most interviewing, one of the most important things to do going into the interview is to try to prepare for some of these difficult situations.
Exactly.
Right. And we're not talking about memorizing answers per se, because you don't want to sound rehearsed, but you do want to think through some of these concepts. And I think the concept of today's topic is a really useful one.
Definitely. So that you
think through.
Exactly. So that you don't get caught off guard, so that you don't look like you hadn't even thought about that. So you have a few talking points, right? We're always about the talking points, not thinking about a memorization sort of, rote memory script that you have.
I mean, in these lives, we use talking points, right? If we were reading off the
true.
script, it would sound very different. And
Exactly.
The key to a fluent conversation and a natural conversation is just sticking with a few talking points, because you can jump from one to the other in a natural and sort of organic way.
And you want to make it conversational, right? That's the goal with the interview. So keep all of that in mind and use that to frame sort of what we're going to share with you today. So the first thing that we can, bring up in this context is the gap in employment doesn't have that same negative connotation as it did a couple years ago. Why is that? Well, one of the reasons is, a couple of years ago, maybe 10 years, before the financial crisis of 2008, even before
10
then.
years.
Yeah. People tended to be employed at the same company for 20 years, 25 years, a lifetime of a career. You spent your career.
A lot of loyalty.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think we're getting an error in signal.
No, we're good.
Okay. Just making sure, because there was a storm.
There was a storm that came through the other day, so
you want to make sure.
If it cuts out, let us know.
Let us know. So anyway, as I was saying, at the time, people were employed for years, and it was jarring to the next employer or to the hiring manager when there was a gap. It's like, what's going on? What did you do? What's, the issue? Whereas now, the gig economy, freelance is on the rise. People are, coming up with their own companies, doing remote work, this kind of thing. It's not as bizarre to have a gap in employment. Quarantine, right? That's something else.
Yeah, that's a really good point because a gap in employment used to be something that was really terrifying, and
Yeah.
it was a sure indication that you got fired. And then you have questions about why were you fired, and all of this,
Yeah.
difficult sort of conversation topics to discuss. These days, job changes are much more fluid, and people's sort of concept of a career is much more fluid now, right? It isn't, the definition of a career is no longer I work at this one company for my entire life. It can be I've tried 5 or 6 different things
Right.
in the first 10 years of my career.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And you're constantly switching.
Yeah.
And just because you're not employed at the moment doesn't mean that you're not active, that you're not strengthening your skills and being productive, right? That stigma is slowly eroding.
Yeah.
But it's still very important in the interview context to make that clear, right? You don't want to leave it up to the interviewer to sort of assume.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why you want to come in with, the understanding that they will ask you the question, that expectation, if there is a gap in your employment history.
Yeah.
And, come up with a way to best articulate what you did at that time. So
That's right.
The big one, right, is skill development. As you mentioned, Greg, right? Developing skills that last a lifetime, that equip you for opportunity, right? And these can be skills that will help you improve in your professional endeavors, be it in the industry that you are currently or you were most recently a part of, or something that you are aspiring towards.
Yeah.
Right? A different career if you want to make that, switch to another industry. And they could also be personal skills that you develop, right? So we have that dichotomy here of personal and professional skills to enhance. So don't forget that, right? Any skill that you acquire can be used in a way that enhances what you do at work or what you do in your daily, life. And an example of a personal skill that you might develop is, maybe you started training for one of those Ironman competitions, right? What does that demonstrate? So it's not just, I trained for this. That demonstrates commitment. It demonstrates dedication. It demonstrates perseverance, right? Discipline. All of these amazing skills that we get from training for something like that, right? Of that caliber. So, it's really interesting, right? How we can take things that we've done and frame it in a way that will, show how desirable we are to the employer, right?
Yeah, that's the challenge. And what's cool about this is that you can do it with pretty much anything, right? If you have the right mindset, you could take pretty much anything that you've been up to and turn it into some kind of learning opportunity. And as Vernon mentioned, you do want to be honest. And good morning, Vernon, by the way.
Good morning. And everyone else watching.
You do want to be honest. That's critical. But in addition to being honest, you can be complete. And we encourage you to be complete. And in the process of being complete, you can, take some liberties in terms of developing a narrative around what it is you were doing. To your point, right?
Right.
If you were trained for an Ironman, right? Some intense physical endeavor, that will entail taking time off. But it's taking time off to do something very impressive. And it shows a lot of powerful qualities that managers love to hire for.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so before you go into an interview, one of the most important things you can do, particularly in the context of this, is to look through your timeline, your chronology, right?
Yeah.
Your chronology of your resume.
Yeah.
And if there are gaps, start to build narratives, stories around why those gaps exist. And even if you were fired, even if you were laid off, right?
Yeah.
Something that is difficult to discuss, that's okay. As long as when you had that period of downtime, you put it to use, right?
Exactly.
And there are many different ways one can put it to use. you don't have to train for the Ironman. You can develop a skill, right? You can
learn motion design.
yeah, exactly. Take a course.
Yeah, there's so many wonderful online courses out now, right? The internet is overflowing with high quality information and all that good stuff, right? So take advantage of it, and you can also frame it in a way where, in that case, maybe you weren't laid off or fired. You wanted to switch gears. You can frame it as, I consciously decided to take a year off. I spent my time doing XYZ, which helps me do ABC now. People take gap years, right? And they'll go and travel.
So my parents never let me take that gap year. That there's the one between high school and college in the U.S. that people like to take off, and you can go and explore. You did a little more of that than I did.
A little bit. I mean, I was enrolled in a intensive French program because I was a double major.
Right.
One of them was the French major in college, so I did a semester abroad. So I was still at school, but it was in a different environment, a different culture, and I loved it. It was a perfect way to reset after, between high school and college. And it wasn't a gap, but it was definitely a way of segueing into the next chapter of my life. Right? So framing it along those lines can also really help, and being sure that you're able to articulate it, right, in the way that you want, so that, as Greg mentioned, you don't leave any space for them to assume something, right?
Yeah, I find really effective job interviews, as the person being interviewed, for me, are ones where I have a clear narrative.
Yes.
Right? A clear
story. What's your story
that I wanted to portray to the person interviewing me, right? Because you only have 30 minutes, sometimes 15 minutes.
Yeah.
If you're lucky, an hour, to sort of paint a picture of who you are. So you can't cover everything. So instead, what you need to do is figure out what are the important aspects that are relevant to this job, and that are aligned with the kinds of people that this company is hiring. And so when it comes to your employment gaps, you want to do the same thing. How do you work that employment gap into your bigger narrative?
Yeah.
Right? If you find that you're struggling to plug in that gap into your narrative, then that's a great opportunity to sit down and really spend some time reworking your narrative, right?
Exactly.
You want to find a way for there to be a cohesive arc.
Right.
And so if it doesn't fit into the arc, then maybe work on developing a new arc, one that does incorporate it, right? And be creative. Again, stay honest. That's critical.
That's
but
really
but
important.
be creative. You mentioned something earlier about you chose to leave, right?
Right. If you say that, if that were the case in your situation where you were tired of what you were doing, you wanted a change of pace, and you decided to quit or to leave.
Right.
You would say then, right, I consciously decided to do that because I wanted to build these skills, I wanted to go to this place, I wanted to travel there.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So my point is, you may not have actually literally chosen to leave, right? It may not have been your decision, but oftentimes those things happen as a result of some subconscious desire to leave, right? That I'm just speaking from experience here, where certain times where a departure happened, was partly instigated by me,
Right.
not wanting to be there and sort of configuring, ensuring that the chips fell that way, right?
Right.
So the point is, a lot of things aren't as black and white as we like to think.
Yeah.
And because of that,
More nuanced.
you have a lot of liberty to frame what happened in a way that sort of fits your narrative.
Exactly.
What is it? The classic phrase, history is written by the historians. What is it?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe some
point,
of the viewers know. Do you guys know?
What we know of history only exists because of the historians
Somebody
who
recorded it.
documented it,
Okay,
right? And of course, even those historians had a perspective. So what we're encouraging you to do here is develop a perspective. and develop a perspective that helps reinforce the narrative that you're trying to drive home.
Exactly. So it's all in the way that, you articulate that gap, that period of time, and what you made of it, right? So touching upon the personal aspects of how you filled that gap with personal skills, cooking, fitness, other, painting, whatever strikes your fancy that might not necessarily align with something in your professional career.
Yeah.
But then also things that you improved upon for the industry that you're in or the industry that you want to be in. Right? If you want to be an animator, then maybe you spent time learning graphic design and motion design and color schemes and that kind of thing. If you want to be in diplomacy, maybe you learned a few languages to help you help you get there.
Yeah.
Maybe you improve your communication skills and your social skills just to be a better human, right? Things like that. So really think about what story you want to weave together, and then how that fits in to the other things that you've done,
Right.
both personally and professionally. And then, how can you share that how can you articulate it in a way that really makes sense to the person
And it's compelling.
interviewing you? Exactly. Because like you said, you don't have that much time.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what's so tricky too about that question, tell me about yourself. Right. Because it's like, who am I? Right. It's this existential question that we're faced with. So this is the same kind of question, right? We need to figure out, like, what did we do in that time when nobody was telling us what to do, right? We didn't have a boss telling you, do this, do that, do that. Maybe you were your own boss. Things like that.
Definitely.
Share those.
Right, and one of the best ways to start framing that narrative is to do some research on what it is that's important to that company, not just from a business perspective,
Yeah, I
right?
love
Not just
that.
what they're trying to sell,
That's a great idea.
but understanding who their customers are, understanding what the core values of the company are, understanding what the culture is like,
Yeah.
right? You want to create, you want to paint a picture of yourself that represents alignment between you and the vision and mission of the company. And again, for different companies, that'll be different. And so you'll want to paint different visions. And that doesn't mean any of those sort of caricatures of yourself is any less honest. They're all honest, right? We're multidimensional humans.
Exactly.
And so there are many different facets to us that we can emphasize in different contexts.
Right.
So you should feel no sort of moral qualms
Yeah.
around developing multiple stories about yourself, multiple narratives.
Exactly.
Because different jobs,
Roles,
different positions
Yeah.
call for different narratives.
Exactly.
And that's what's cool about being alive, right? And particularly in
Yeah.
today's world where
Yeah.
we can be working at so many different things, and we can have so many different skills.
Right.
There are so many narratives to tell.
Yeah.
And that's part of the fun is coming up with a narrative that you're proud of, that you feel good talking about, and that is aligned with the goals and vision of wherever it is you're applying.
Exactly. Yeah, so those are some ways to really think about, how can you most effectively and honestly and proudly share what you've been up to, because there's nothing to be ashamed of, for whatever reason it is that you have that employment gap. It could be the birth of a child, helping out an elderly parent or relative, traveling somewhere, recovering from injury, maybe just avoiding burnout, right? And trying something new.
Yeah.
Maybe living life because your definition of life is not the way that it was before the employment gap or whatever, right? There's so many different reasons. And it's not so much the why, like why do you have this gap? It's what you did with that gap, what you achieved from that gap. So if you reframe it that way, there's nothing to be ashamed of. It's all about how you articulate it confidently, and also to look back on that moment and say, wow, I learned so much. I all these skills that I've acquired, because that is the most important thing, to constantly be acquiring skills and be it personal or professional, so that
Yeah.
you're constantly, employable, and you're constantly evolving,
Yeah.
right? It's about the evolution.
Yeah, so Vernon actually had a really good point, and I love
Oh,
this
great.
one, which is one way that you could have an employment gap is
Yeah.
you decided to give a shot at starting your own business, right? Now, let's say it doesn't work out, which in a lot of cases that is the case, right? It doesn't work out. It's extremely difficult. There are a lot of uncontrolled circumstances, factors that go into it.
Sure.
So most businesses, unfortunately, don't work out, at least not the first try. Now, in that situation, one might feel a little bit nervous to talk about
Explain
that because
that.
it was a failure. I don't want to talk about a failure during my interview.
Failure.
Right, a failure. But the truth is, there are so many lessons
Yeah.
that one learns in starting a business that there's so much to talk about.
Right.
Even if the business didn't turn out the way you hoped it would, that's still a really good thing to discuss, right? It can be very powerful. You took initiative to try and start your own
The guts
thing,
that it
right?
required to
Yeah.
initiate something
Exactly.
like that.
You were brave enough to take a risk.
Yeah.
You were
Maybe left
confident
a
enough.
high-paying, cushiony job.
Yeah,
right?
totally. Yeah, you were
You know.
confident enough in yourself to give it a shot. And in the process of getting that business going, whether or not it succeeded, there were so many different challenges that you had to overcome where there's no manual, right? There's no instruction set. So talking about all that stuff, right? In general, failures often come with a lot of lessons. So don't necessarily be
always,
afraid
yes.
to bring those up, right?
And
Don't
explore
try-
those failures.
Explore them.
Right? Like when Greg was saying, look at your resume, look at all the things that you've done. Maybe look at photographs to spark your memory, because sometimes we don't have that written on paper, and you say, what did I do at that time? All of these things to help you write that arc, that narrative.
Exactly.
And how can you fit that in there, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a matter of, in general, look, even in businesses, when you're in the job, there's still lots of failures, right? There's many failures. You had an assignment and you didn't complete it the way you wanted to. Or the boss wasn't as pleased with the deliverable as you'd hoped, right? All these opportunities all these situations are
Teachable
opportunities for learning,
moments.
teachable moments.
Yes.
And employers want to know that in the face of adversity, right, in the face of obstacles, you're able to learn from them and do better next time, right? So in many ways, failures and challenging situations in general.
They're character building.
They're character building, right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of substance there. And so it's about diving into those, really analyzing them, spending some time before the interview to do that, and figuring out, extracting the lessons from them, right?
Exactly.
Understanding what could have been done differently, and what you've learned from it, so that you can talk about it in a way that says, I've actually come out of this stronger and more capable than when I went in.
Exactly. The other thing I want to mention is, we talked about the different way of perceiving that employment gap depending on, your generation, basically, right? So you should, when you go into that interview, right, the hiring manager might be older than you, more experienced, and also might have a worldview of the employment gap being something of a negative connotation. Don't let that deter you from expressing, all of the things that we shared right now about your story and the failures and the teachable moments and all of that comes from that employment gap. But do be cognizant of that potential generational bias.
Yeah.
Right? So go in knowing what you're going to touch upon, because surely if there is a gap, they're going to want to know, what you did with that time. But don't be afraid to, be honest and, share your story, and don't be ashamed of it, right? You want to be confident as you express that, even if there is that generational gap and the generational bias there. Because at the end of the day, if you do the maximum that you can do, and you have control only over what you can do. Then you've put the irons in the fire, and then the rest is, up to the universe, and the hiring manager, I guess. So just keep that in mind, right? Because not everyone might treat it in a, what's the word I'm looking
Well, yeah,
for?
everyone has a different sort of perspective,
interpretation of it.
That's right. And you have to be aware of that. I mean, these things are always crapshoots, so
Right. Just be mindful, right? Not to
absolutely.
let that
And you're right, the generation gap
deter you.
can again, people from older generations may be less
Inclined.
less open to this idea of, going off and exploring,
Traveling the world for a year.
traveling a year, or exploring
making
a new
blog,
skill, or
right.
so forth. So that doesn't mean they can't get it. It just means it might take a little more
You might have
effort
to work harder
to sort of convey
Yeah.
the value of it, engage them in it, sort of get them immersed in why the experience is important for you.
Yeah.
The other thing
Yeah.
that I think can be challenging is you at the moment might not have something specific to talk about. The employment gap that matters the most is the one that's most recent, right? The further back you go, the less they care. The one that's most recent is the one they're going to care most about.
Right.
So if you are in the middle of one at present,
Yeah.
right, and you don't feel like you have a good narrative for it at the moment, that's okay, right? This is now an opportunity to figure out how to do something
Yeah,
that will be
exactly.
fun to talk about, right? That will show some of these qualities, resourcefulness, grit, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Growth mindset.
passion,
Yeah.
persistence, perseverance, right?
Yeah.
All these things, you have an opportunity now.
Fortitude. That's the word I'm
that's a good
looking
one.
for.
Right? You have an opportunity now, right after this live, to jump in and get your hands dirty with something that will be meaningful to talk about.
Exactly.
Because there's always an opportunity to create new stories, new narratives, new experiences.
Always.
And from those, you can use those as a springboard to enhance your narrative, right? So if it's not the case at the moment, well, you have the power to change that and make it the case by going out and proactively seeking opportunities to develop who you are, the skills, and the stories and experiences that can help bolster a strong interview performance.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So, it's going to take some work on your end to figure out how you want to frame it and be able to articulate as best you can, right? It comes down to the story you weave, the narrative that you're putting together,
Yeah.
and the way you articulate it, right?
Exactly.
So articulating it with confidence, right? You're confident, you're poised, you're sure of yourself. There's nothing to be ashamed of. You're proud of all the skills that you've developed and what you've learned, even if there were, many failures along the way. That's part of life, right? And that's how we grow.
Yeah.
So being able to convey it that way will really, I think it'll get you to the place you want to go. Right?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a nice way of summing it up. And
Yeah.
you mentioned the growth mindset. I think that goes very hand in hand with this approach, right? The more of a growth mindset you can adopt, and
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we have some videos on growth mindset
We
out
do,
there.
yeah.
The more of a growth mindset you can adopt, the better you'll be able to contextualize these employment gaps as a positive and
Growing experience.
strengthening experience, exactly. So learning to adopt that growth mindset will help you see the opportunity in the adversity, and that's really what this is about: developing that cohesive narrative that shows that even in times of difficulty and uncertainty, you had the fortitude,
The grit,
the grit,
the perseverance.
the passion to sort of power through. And
Exactly.
persevere.
And bounce back if you are bouncing back.
Yeah, so I think that about wraps it up today.
Yeah.
I hope everyone found this useful. This is something that we all deal with, and it takes some work, but with the right preparation, you can really turn difficult and awkward conversations into ones that really help develop who you are as a person and can significantly strengthen your candidacy for these roles.
Exactly. And gives you an opportunity to shine, right? Why not?
Yep. So thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
everyone.
and thanks so much for participating. For those of you who participated in today's
Yes,
chat,
thank
really,
you. It's wonderful.
yeah, we love it. We love chatting with
We
you.
love the
We love to know
interactivity.
that you're there.
Yeah.
And you had a lot of great things to say.
So many wonderful insights. Thank
Yeah.
you very much. I'm going to read all of them after this because I can't see the screen. So thank you, everyone. And be sure to subscribe, put on the notification, turn on that notification bell to get notified about every lesson and live stream. Check out our blog, all of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
I don't have to
the whole
say it.
shebang.
The whole
All right, guys, have a great weekend, and we will see you next week.
Happy exploring, everyone.